And we continue at 2:07 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Waggs at the sports desk in Culver City.
John, it's Zero Bail Day here in L.A. County. In celebration, let's hear Holly Mitchell talk about the real victims.
And when we talk about victims, when we talk about those who are incarcerated pre-trial perhaps, who are victims of crime while locked up.
Those are the real victims.
So the people that we need to have sympathy for are the people who are locked up for breaking the law.
Yes, because they could be victims of crime when they're in the jail because the conditions are so horrible.
Well, at least she doesn't have bastardized logic.
Quite frankly.
800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the former American ambassador to Germany and the director of national intelligence. He's also the man in charge of Fix California, which you can get online at fixcalifornia.com. Ambassador Richard Grenell, welcome.
John, thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with the big news here in California. Dianne Feinstein, the senior U.S. senator representing California, died on Thursday night. The announcement was made public on Friday morning, and earlier today, or I guess last night, on Sunday night, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced that he has settled on a replacement for Dianne Feinstein, LaFonsa Butler, who is a lobbyist who lives in the state of Maryland, who hasn't lived in California in some time or ever been in elected office before. She used to run the SEIU here in California, and she was a UC regent, left California to run Emily's List, which is an abortion rights lobbying group and fundraising group in Washington, D.C. What do you make of this appointment?
Well, I think it's really important that the media give the context for what Gavin Newsom said and how he chose. And he said that this would be an appointment of a black woman. And so he selected a black woman from just looking at black women. And I find this to be appalling. I find it to be racist and sexist, and somehow we're supposed to go along with it as a diversity positive hire. I just don't understand. Dr. King taught us that we are supposed to look at people and not look at their race. That was his dream, is that someday we would have a society where you didn't look at someone's race. And yet Gavin Newsom, a one-party state controlled by the far left, with the media who are afraid to stand up to him in Sacramento, he announces that he's going to be a racist and a sexist and only look at black women. He decided that he would not look at Asians, he would not look at Hispanics, he would not look at whites. And to exclude people based on your skin color or your gender, I think is outrageous. And we got to be very clear. This is not progress. This is not good. This is racism and sexism. And why are we pretending that it's not? Shame on Governor Gavin Newsom for only selecting from a pool of black women. I think that the Asians in California, white people in California, Hispanic people who were excluded from being chosen, for being even considered because of their skin color or their gender. It's outrageous, John, and we shouldn't allow it. We should scream it at the top of our lungs that this was a pick that literally started from racism and sexism.
There was another group that Gavin Newsom excluded during his search, California residents.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he didn't care about the residency requirement, which is part of our state constitution. So he did violate the state constitution. Now, what's going to happen with this is what happens with everything like sanctuary cities is we're going to turn it into it was just a matter of time. She had to re-register from Maryland to California. But when he selected her he was not a California resident, and this is in violation of the Constitution. The LA Times will not tell you that. No reporter in Sacramento that works for a legacy newspaper or radio or TV organization will tell you that. They just want to brush it under the rug and say, "Oh well, she'll re-register and everything will be fine." But this is a straight white male, Gavin Newsom, doing this. If Gavin Newsom really truly believed in all of this identity politics, he would resign so that someone else could be governor. We've never had a female governor of the state of California.
That's true. And the lieutenant governor, Eleni Kounalakis, would be the first female governor if he were to resign. So he could certainly put his money where his mouth is if he wanted to.
That's exactly right. And yet he's out there duping all of these people into thinking that he's, looking out for them. And who's next? Where are the individuals who are next? Because what he is doing is just selecting through this phony, terrible, un-American process of identity politics and pretending like, all the people in the buckets just need to wait their turn for the straight white male to decide who gets the power next.
Yeah, really, he boxed himself into this corner. It wasn't as if there was some third party, some other entity that boxed him into this. He was asked about it on Joy Reid's show on MSNBC, and he was the one that pledged to do this. And that was back during the recall campaign when he wanted to make sure that the Democratic base got behind him and did so enthusiastically.
Yeah, so here let's dig deeper on that and figure out why would somebody, a straight white male governor like this, decide that he has to pick from just a singular pool of people and exclude a whole bunch of other people. Why would he do that? The reason he does that is because in California he can get away with it, and by the left loves to pit us against each other. And the more that we can be at each other's throat because it's not my turn, it's your turn, and then wrap it into this diversity, equity, and inclusion baloney, that they think that they're making progress. It's a terrible strategy. It's un-American, racist, and sexist, but he will continue doing it because the media in Sacramento let him get away with it. They don't push back. John, we used to have a system where if you stepped out, whether you were a Republican or Democrat, and you made a mistake, and you did something that was totally driven for yourself and your future political office, not for the people of California. If you did something like that, there would be the LA Times or the Bee or someone who would step up and call you out on it and would shame you, and you would see the consequences by the public shaming through the media. We don't have that anymore. We have a bunch of people in Sacramento who cheerlead the left. And that's why we have a state that literally is telling you, spending money in ads, take a quick shower and don't water your lawn very often, even though we live on the ocean. We have plenty of water. Every country in the Middle East has been able to figure out, even though they live in the desert, how to have plenty of water. But California leadership is telling you, take a quick shower and have a brown lawn, but not recognizing this mismanagement that they do because we live on the ocean.
LaFonza Butler has not given us any indication as to whether or not she will be a candidate for the U.S. Senate. However, moments ago, Governor Newsom spoke to the press, and he certainly sounded like he fully expected her to run for a full term and that he would be enthusiastically behind her. He was asked about her never having been in an elected office before. She ran a union, she ran Emily's List, and she sat on the UC Board of Regents, which is an appointed position here in California. And he said her lack of elected experience is actually one of the things that he really likes about her, that she can go into office not understanding what the limitations are. And if you've been in elected office for a long time, you feel limited and you go in with that mentality. It sounds to me like he's going to support her over Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee.
Yeah, look, this is a mess, and eventually they are now understanding just how toxic and terrible it is to have someone pick someone according to identity politics. This is a disaster, and the people who aren't chosen, the people who aren't considered, begin to say, "Wait a minute, this is not the system that I wanted." You like the system if they're selecting you. So it's a very elitist system. But when you're not selected, you begin to see the problems of it. Now, we all know the hypocrisy of Gavin Newsom knows no bounds. But the idea that he's now saying that being an elected official to consecutive offices is actually not a good thing, we should remember those words the next time he tries to run for anything and use it against him.
What do you do if you're Adam Schiff? Because you live by the sword, you die by the sword. He and Katie Porter and Barbara Lee have benefited from these identity politics in Washington, D.C. for some time. And now the same identity politics that they use to go after Republicans with might be the issue that ends up writing their political obituary.
Look, I think Gavin Newsom has a point that outsiders to the system are good. I think that this selection is terrible because she's a radical fringe candidate that pushes fringe policies like abortion on demand with no limits. I think most of the Americans and most Californians are in the camp of what the Europeans do on abortion, which is 15 weeks. Let's have some common sense talk. Now, the media will never reward that. They'll pretend like you're radical if you want to talk about the common sense 15-week European restrictions. I think that's a smart move. And yet this individual that he selected is a radical on that issue. She wants no limitations whatsoever. So I don't like the selection of her. But having an outsider is good. When it comes to Schiff, Porter, and Lee, these people go to Washington, D.C. as Congress people, and they begin to believe that just because they serve on a committee and they vote, but they don't implement anything. They just vote on how to spend your money. And therefore, there's no consequences for continuing to vote to spend people's money because all they do is just vote to spend money. And why would you say no? You just keep saying yes. And then you go to those constituents and say, I'm asking for more money. There's no consequences for spending $33 trillion in the debt that we have. So these congressional people begin to believe that that's the only job qualification to be a senator is to continue just voting and spending money and then having a good press release that goes to the people benefiting from that program and talking about how great you are. So the idea of having an outsider to come in, and I think there's going to be other people coming in that are outsiders that are way better. But having a fresh perspective on Washington is very important.
We're speaking with Ambassador Richard Grenell, former Director of National Intelligence. Ambassador Grenell, over the weekend, a Democratic member of Congress representing the state of New York, Jamal Bowman, tripped off a fire alarm at the Capitol building. He was trying to, or at least the theory is, delay a vote. The Democrats did not want that vote to happen, and he was near a fire alarm. He pulled the fire alarm, was caught on tape doing so. His explanation is he thought that by pulling what was clearly marked as a fire alarm would open up the door, and that way he could get out because he didn't think he could get out without pulling the fire alarm. Obviously, that generated a lot of news. He then gave Democratic members of Congress talking points as to how to respond to it if they were asked about his behavior from the press corps. And in his talking points, he instructed his fellow Democrats to refer to Republicans as Nazis. He then got in trouble with Jewish groups and other groups over that phraseology and terminology. And now today he's throwing his staff under the bus, saying that they wrote that without his permission and it's not his fault. Your thoughts on all of that?
Look, we've just spent the last several months where the Democrats have been screaming there's no proof that Joe Biden is corrupt. And while we present all sorts of evidence, they keep saying no proof, no proof, no proof. Here we're presented with video proof of this individual pulling an alarm. And what do they tell us? Don't believe your eyes. It was a mistake. I think that the public needs to wise up. This is now at the point where you cannot rely on the media to play fair. You have to wise up and start doing something. If you're listening to this radio show, you cannot just hope that someone else does something. You got to speak up. You got to push back. We see video evidence, and we're told by the media and all of the DC types that our eyes are lying to us and that's not the real thing, and just ignore it. This creates the standard of what will they ever be able to admit to? What type of proof and fact will they ever say, okay, I have to change my mind because I've seen the evidence? They will never. These people are trying to control power no matter what. Meanwhile, on the conservative side, we've got people fighting over ridiculous things. We need to understand what's at stake. What is the other side doing? They will stop at nothing to keep power. They will add states. If they lose, they will add Supreme Court justices. If they lose, they will cancel you. They will debank you. They will call you a racist, sexist, homophobe, a Russian agent. But now, instead of complaining, the public needs to wise up. You need to push back. You're going to lose your country if you do not understand what's at stake and what these people are telling you. And I have to believe that normal, common sense people who are sitting on the sidelines, when we get them to vote, when we encourage them to vote, when we encourage them to get involved, they will be with us. Remember, John, roughly 50% of the public is voting. So 50% of the people are totally apathetic, sitting on the sidelines saying nothing works anyway. Why am I going to vote? We got to go get those people, get them registered to vote. You can go to fixcalifornia.com, register to vote, and get involved. You're losing your country.
Ambassador Richard Grenell. You can get him online at fixcalifornia.com and follow him on Twitter at Richard Grenell. Ambassador Grenell, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks, John.
If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to listen to the podcast edition of this show, that just got easier to do.
That's right. We've got a new and improved app. It's the KABC app. You can search on the Apple App Store or the Android Store for 790 KABC or KABC AM. And it's the easiest way to download podcasts of this show and to listen live to the station whenever and wherever you are. So give it a download, and then you'll have this at your fingertips. It works with CarPlay. It is the absolute best way to listen to this station and download podcasts of this show. It's so easy to use. You won't believe how easy it is.
I cannot believe it, quite frankly.
Wow, this has turned into a busy Monday, Randy.
And the email has exploded today. We appreciate all those emails. Keeps us entertained during the commercial breaks.
Especially the ones that are too dirty to read on the air.
Which is like half.
800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a Republican political strategist specializing in political training, campaign management, and voter education. You can get him online at LonnieLeitner.com and follow him on Twitter at Lonnie Leitner. Lonnie Leitner, welcome.
Hey, thank you very much for having me today. Exciting times.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the big news. On Thursday, Senator Feinstein passed away. She has not been laid to rest yet. Apparently, she's going to lie in state, not at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, but at San Francisco City Hall. That's supposed to happen later on this week. And whenever a politician passes away, the jockeying to see who will replace them happens almost immediately. But you have a little bit of time. You have a certain period where the focus, the attention, is on the person who died. Lonnie, I don't know if it's because she lived to be 90 years of age. I don't know if it was because Gavin Newsom has spoken out so frequently about what he would do if he were to replace her. But it seemed like people just stopped talking about Dianne Feinstein the minute that she died. And, man, everyone focused on who would replace her. Would it be a black woman? Would Gavin Newsom keep his promise? Will it help him running for the presidency? It happened instantly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Whether or not you agreed or disagreed with Senator Feinstein and her politics, she did lead a remarkable career, starting, as you said, in San Francisco, mayor of San Francisco, elected to the U.S. Senate in 1992, and then reelected several times since then. In today's standards, she was a fairly moderate U.S. senator representing the state of California. And, Newsom so badly wants to be president of the United States, he could not wait 1 second to even, have the funeral services of the late senator. He so badly wants to be president, he had to get out there and not only make good on his promise, but in the words of Governor Rod Blavich of Illinois, he knew that this seat was very valuable, and he was not going to let this go to waste. Not only did he appoint a black woman and hold up to his bargain, he also appointed a lesbian, the first openly black lesbian who was the president of Emily's List. You have very smart listeners, but Emily's List is a radical left-wing group that elects pro-choice female candidates. Could you imagine if a Republican governor had an appointment opportunity and appointed the head of the NRA? This appointment is no different. Gavin Newsom is paying off political allies and rewarding a friend that he has a long history with.
It's interesting. Gavin Newsom and others talk about how the Democrats are the party of democracy, and they're protecting democracy. Donald Trump and Republicans and anyone who disagrees with them is a threat to democracy. Let's talk about democracy in California. Gavin Newsom, in addition to the judges and the commissions and the boards where he has a constitutional right to make appointments, has appointed both of California's U.S. senators. He appointed the Attorney General of the state of California, and who oversees the California Department of Justice, and he appointed the California Secretary of State, which is responsible for running our elections and issuing business licenses. We know that incumbents almost never lose re-election, particularly in offices like these where we're a heavily Democratic state. If you're appointed to that job, you're essentially bulletproof for the rest of your career, and you can keep these offices, or at least the ones without term limits, until you die in office or retire. Gavin Newsom was able to decide, one man was able to decide who sits in these seats, and the people of California never had a say. That doesn't seem very democratic to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is a threat to democracy in the Democrats' eyes. It's no wonder that California has the highest taxes in the country, has the highest poverty rate in the country, has the highest homeless rate in the country. And now, because of Gavin Newsom and his policies and his friends he's appointed to these offices, California now has the highest exodus rate in the country. Not only did he elevate his friend to the U.S. Senate, Ms. Butler, she's the head of a fundraising juggernaut that works to elect, the pro-choice Democrat women. And just let's talk about a threat to democracy, a step further. Butler is a veteran organizer and well known in Newsom's orbit. He contemplated hiring her to be his first chief of staff, and she was a one-time partner in the San Francisco-based consulting firm, now known as Bear Star Strategies, with his top political advisors. She remained a close confidant to Vice President Kamala Harris. after serving as a senior strategist on her 2020 presidential campaign. So for the party of democracy, this is sure inside baseball, rewarding political friends and setting them up to, as you say, once you're an incumbent, it's very hard to beat an incumbent. I think we should talk to Adam Schiff and Katie Porter what they think about democracy today, because they're the hardest hit.
What do you think they're going to do? Do you think they stay in the race? Do you think they get out and they move into the governor's race? Do they go back and run for re-election to their House seats? How do they react to this?
Well, they now have the thankless task of running against a black lesbian, right? And Barbara Lee, she's got to be beside herself. So who knows what she's going to do? I suspect that she will get back and just run for re-election in, I believe, her Oakland area seat. But I think Adam Schiff will still stay in the race. Adam Schiff entered Congress and he was a blue dog Democrat. And today, he's a radical leftist. But I think the fact that Adam Schiff has such a national profile and therefore is not only able to raise a ton of money within California, he's able to raise a ton of money throughout the country. So I think he will be a contender. But in the world of identity politics and, the Democratic Party, are they going to elect a straight white male, albeit a radical leftist, to the U.S. Senate over the first black lesbian female to serve in the United States Senate? I think that's a tough sell, but I think because Schiff has the name ID and the money, that he stays in. As far as Ms. Porter, your guess is as good as mine.
Lonnie Leitner, Republican campaign strategist. You can follow him on Twitter at Lonnie Leitner and find him online at LonnieLeitner.com. Lonnie, thanks so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
Great. Have a great day. Thank you.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Well, Susan writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com and says, what I want to know is what no one has been able to answer. Why is LA County instituting a zero bail policy when state law doesn't allow it and voters rejected it?
That's a very good point.
Everyone who's asked about this is shifting the blame. The Board of Supervisors says it's the courts. The court says it's the legislature. The legislature says it's the courts. Nobody will give a clear answer on how we got here, but we all just have to go along with it.
We know one thing, though.
What's that?
Don't blame Hilda Solis.
No, do not blame Hilda Solis. That's the first thing that she said when it was her turn to speak at the Board of Supervisors meeting where they discussed this last week.
The courts decided this, and the legislature decided this. We didn't decide this. And I think that has to be made very clear to the public. And I don't shy away either from people calling my office or my staff or telling us what the heck is going on here.